this idea that everything is connected. It's not the budget cycle, the goal cycle, the strategy cycle. It's all part of it. It's not the organization pillar of success and the department goals and the individual goals. It's all part of it. It's not clinical and non-clinical people. It's all of us. It is so easy for us to keep that idea of siloing like happens in healthcare in so many ways. And I think the more that we can embrace the idea that we're all in it together, I think the more successful that we will be. It's one of the reasons why I think this idea, one great experience, one great team, has been so effective for us in the response from frontline staff who can know and understand that, and that it fits into their real work. It's all of us.
Welcome to Culture Change RX, the podcast for healthcare professionals that are committed to creating a thriving workplace culture, improving the experiences of employees and patients, and ultimately unlocking their organization's next level of potential. I'm Sue Tetzloff, your host and co-founder of Capstone Leadership Solutions. Join me and my insightful guests each week as we share actionable insights for navigating the crucial people side of the business of healthcare. Subscribe now for a weekly dose of Culture Change RX. Now let's dive into this week's conversation where culture change takes center stage. Welcome to another episode of Culture Change RX. Thank you for joining us today. And today's topic might seem kind of maybe like a different one for our podcast on culture change, but I think you're going to see how the connection is there. And I have a great guest here, Kevin, who's going to help us make that connection. So Kevin, first, let's have you introduce yourself to our audience, and then we are going to jump into the topic of setting and achieving goals and the impact of that on our cultures. So welcome, Kevin. A brief introduction and we'll get right at it.
Thanks, Sue. So I'm Kevin Stranberg. I have had a long tenure with Tamarack Health, which has 2 critical access hospitals in northern Wisconsin, as well as community clinics. Right now, I am working more specifically with Stranberg and Associates, which is the company that I founded about 20 years ago. We work specifically with strategic planning, customer experience, training and facilitation, and creative problem solving. I work with a number of different clients. A number of them are healthcare, but a number of them are outside of the healthcare realm. What I love about that work is that it gives me really good insight into how organizations work and how they can find new ways of thinking, which I'm always really intrigued with when I'm working with the group. So I'm happy to be here. Thanks for asking me.
Yes, I'm so glad we have this opportunity to reconnect using this format as a way to have a delightful conversation. I can't say I've ever had a conversation with you, Kevin, where I just didn't enjoy our time together and what we talk about. And this is all about culture, right? And so I know, based on what I know about your experience there at Tamarack Health, is that when we talk about engagement in our cultures, there's a couple ways where we can really invite engagement. One is by inviting employees to be employee-driven teams, and you were part of that too. But we're not going to talk about that really today. But another way that we can engage employees to contribute beyond their day-to-day job description is to invite them to contribute to setting and achieving goals. So with that kind of tee up, I would love for you to jump in and talk about anywhere where you want to start on this idea of what do goals have to do with culture?
Well, I really feel like the goal setting process and the goal cycle, the pathway of getting there is really one of the hidden gems in changing culture. And the idea of where are we now and where are we going has everything to do with culture. Organizations have to have a clear path. And although we look at a very nimble way of strategic planning, we know that we still have to have a vision, even if it changes as we move throughout the process. It's been a slow process, to tell you the truth. Like culture change in general, it doesn't happen overnight. And I think one of the reasons why it doesn't happen overnight is because it is a new way of thinking, especially for healthcare workers. I think when we started this process back in 2017, and we started talking about pillars of success for the organization and then departmental goals, it was a very foreign concept for many leaders and an even more foreign concept for frontline employees. In many ways, I think that their jobs, frontline employees' jobs, are incredibly complex and incredibly demanding. And as we launched into this whole idea of goal setting and pillars of success, I can tell you, there were lots of people who said, wait a minute, that's not my job. It has nothing to do with the work that I do as a rad tech. It has nothing to do with my work as a frontline OB nurse. Frankly, at that point in time, they were right. It took the slow process of coming around to understand that everyone needs to have a vision for the future, not only for themselves, but for their department and then for the organization. It's been a very slow, steady climb in that acceptance of the process, but really rewarding. Rewarding because we can put dots on the wall today to say, how did we make a difference in the work today? And that changes culture in and of itself.
Yes, yes. Like maybe even before 2017, before you started this evolution of introducing and then refining and optimizing this process is, maybe before that, the closest thing we had to that was annual New Year's resolutions or something like on a personal or whatever level, like that might have been our concept. And then to say, how do we apply this to our business and our work together and those pillars and say, okay, this is where we are and this is where we want to go. Because we know that like with annual New Year's resolutions, most people by month one have failed. So how do we like take and have multiple resolution like things going on in our organization that don't involve just one person, but many people, and then actually keep them alive and going? What kind of things made that actually possible so that things that were set actually did get work on them and maybe made some results?
So just to play on that New Year's resolution a little bit, there was one other point in time where every employee was told about goal setting, and that was their annual review. And
oh, yes.
Let's talk about it at your annual review, and then we close out the review and we put it on a shelf, and then we'll talk about it 365 days later. And I think there again, it fits so nicely with the culture transformation that happens not once a year, but so much more often depending on the actual work that's being done. And to tell you the truth, the results are the same as New Year's resolutions.
When you use that annual review process as your, it just wasn't working, was it? Yeah, that's my experience too, is like that was not the system or the process that was going to be your goal cycle for sure. So,
So for us, I think the most important first step in this was the piece of awareness that you talked about. And I feel one of the major transformations for us was the establishment of our 5 pillars of success. The idea of looking at workforce, quality, service, finance, and community as legitimate ways for us to say, number one, are we moving the organization forward? But number 2, are we moving it forward in the right way? And that really sets the stage for all of the other work. Because, of course, the first pillar that we talk about is the workforce pillar, which is all about culture.
All about it.
Based, in employee engagement. It's based in recruitment and retention. It's based in satisfaction of leaders and satisfaction of employees. That's all about changing culture. And the thing that we learned along the way that I didn't really realize, I mean, as we did the PDSA process in all of this, one thing that I really didn't realize is, we set 5 areas of pillars of success, which, by the way, we purposely did not select growth because we knew if we did the other 5 well, that growth would come. And it has.
Yes.
It's great. But in looking at this workforce pillar, what we realized is in the process, we had to connect people to their real work, not make it extra work, like I talked about earlier. It has to be vital for what they do. And the first step of that was awareness. Why are we looking at workforce? Why are we looking at quality? What I find interesting in that, Sue, is that there is this I thought that it was 5 separate pillars. And as time went on, we realized, oh, no, 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 no. That one goes across 3 of the pillars. That one goes across 4 of the pillars. And so leaders were understanding as they became more mature in their department creation, that it really was a blending of those. And that if they were looking at a particular project on quality, it had a direct effect on workforce. It had a direct effect on service. And then sometimes it also had direct effect on finance. So all of a sudden, this goal setting cycle, this roadmap that was created became integral to their work, not extra work.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's so important because, nobody wants extra work, right?
No,
Nobody's looking. No matter what role you're in healthcare, you're doing important work. Your job wouldn't exist if it wasn't needed by the organization, right? We're working in our individual roles and then collectively contributing to a process and across departments and shifts and whatever. But I think one thing that's really great about goals is it does start to show the results of that effort in a way that's measurable. It's like playing a sporting event, right? If you weren't keeping score and you weren't keeping stats or whatever, like you practiced and you played, but there was no objective record of, did you win? Did you lose? Did you do better than last time? Is it trending to be better or worse or whatever? So we got all this stuff going on, but how do we know if it's the right stuff and it's getting the right results if we don't measure this stuff? And so can you speak to maybe a little bit about, as an organization, learning to measure and track things and record things, and maybe some of the struggle with that and maybe some of the success and positives about that and the actual number data piece?
We can, but I want to go back to this idea of checking the data in a sports game or whatever. I think it's so interesting. We've kind of moved out of the arena of you get a participation ribbon and you get a participation ribbon and you get a participation ribbon, which was a big deal for a very long time. We don't want to set kids up for failure. But I think in those kinds of situations, but also for staff, it's this idea of getting better. It's not about winning. It's about getting better. It's about saying, this time we were at the 85th percentile, and last time we were only at the 75th. So look at the improvement that you made between that, having nothing to do with the final score. Having to do with individual or department improvement, I think, is the piece that is so important. I think overall, the idea of goal setting and having that go down from the organizational level to the department level to the individual level is a constant process. There isn't an end game there. And it isn't an end game for a couple of reasons. The first is we see so much turnover in particular positions, whether people are coming in brand new to the organization or whether they're being promoted to higher positions. At Tamarack Health, the statistics shows that we have 63% new staff in the last 5 years. Think about that. Over half. It's huge. And some of that is attrition, but some of it is brand new positions. We've now gone to 1,100 employees, which is an incredible growth for us. So first of all, it's this idea that we're really sitting with new people. But second of all, it's the idea that you can continually grow and change. You can look at a goal that puts you sometimes at the 50th percentile or succeeding half the time as success. Then build on that to say, this year we're at 50th and next year we're going to be at 70th and the next year we're going to be at 90th. I do struggle with this idea of the concept of being perfect, the concept of no errors. Of course, we want to look at zero harm. I get that. That is the ultimate goal. And I get that.
Yeah.
Yet I also know that we're dealing with human beings. We're dealing with human beings as patients, as loved ones, as physicians, and as staff people. And
absolutely.
How do we treat people or situations? I think it's so important to ask the what when there's a problem, not the who. Because if you're concentrating on the what, you're then looking at just culture, which again is a little far removed from this idea of goal setting, but it still fits with this idea of the human side of our work.
just taking this quick break to let you know that the registration deadline is coming up soon for our Healthcare Executive Forum that is happening on June 12th and 13th, 2024 at Mission Point Resort on beautiful Mackinac Island here in Michigan. Join us for these 2 days of immersive learning, engaging discussions, and networking opportunities. Go to capstoneleadership.net. This year's topic is maximizing momentum with trust, teamwork, and time. Registration deadline is May 20th. Get your spot today, capstoneleadership.net. Yes. Yeah. It's humans that's setting a goal. It's humans that are working to make that progress towards the goal. When you bring up just culture, it makes me think of like in the post cycle after we've, set the goal, we've done the work to try to achieve the goal and hopefully achieve the goal or at least make that getting better amount of progress in the year is, the idea of looking back, almost like a post-mortem review on our goal cycle to say, okay, we set these goals, we made this amount of progress in these areas, we made improvement in these areas, we struggled. And what can we learn from that so that we can get better and better at getting better, right? And so it really takes that dissection. I know that just came out. But it's that dissection, just like we would with a medical error. We do a postmortem review and say what went wrong there. How could we prevent that, from happening again if it was a poor outcome? But to look back on a goal that wasn't met and say, why wasn't it met? Instead of saying who didn't meet the goal, but what happened that we can learn from. So I think it provides that opportunity too. I'm such not only a data geek, but a process improvement geek that goals just is a ripe setup for, like you said, PDSA and doing that study, adjust, evaluation. So we could win, we could lose. What does that do to your culture when you get to the end of a year?
Well, I would say for me, I work very specifically on trying to not look at it as binary, win or lose. You either make it or you don't. That isn't true because progress is part of the winning, even if you didn't cross the finish line the way that you thought you were going to. The other piece of that I think is important is that if you have a strong goal setting roadmap for the background work with Tamarack Health, we were at the beginning looking at quarterly information and saying, let's review the information for the organization quarterly. And as we got more mature and as individual leaders found their roadmap, it all of a sudden was no longer quarterly information. It was monthly information, or it was weekly information, or it was daily information that they grabbed hold of. It all of a sudden became their work, not administration telling them what they had to do. So there are two things about that win-lose. First of all, I don't think it's a win-lose. I think if you're working on something, you always win because you're always moving the organization forward, even if you didn't quite get where you wanted to go. And then second of all, you really do win as an organization when leaders and frontline staff take it on themselves. It becomes their work and they understand why that's important work. It's really exciting when that happens. It's a little bit intimidating when you're really the resource of information for them and all of a sudden they're farther down the road than I am.
Yes.
Which is really, really good when you think about it. I mean, it's great, but it's like, wow, I never thought about that. Really interesting work. And then the other thing about it, especially in healthcare, Sue, that we can never forget is that getting better means it's better for the patient.
Oh, amen. Yes.
Improving from 65% to 75% means that it specifically affects that patient, that loved one's group, either directly or indirectly through staff being smarter, doing great creative problem solving, whatever. The ultimate piece of this is better for the patient. And so that's the win. If I'm going to call a win, that's the win.
Yeah, that is. Yeah, that is where the rubber meets the road. I mean, that's why we exist. That's the mission. We're there to serve. And so the goal cycle, really, if you want to think about the why behind it, it's just keep getting better to serve them better. Yes.
it is the discussion that happens with those individuals that they then know that they have specifically made a difference. They made a difference for their coworkers. They've made a difference for the organization, but also, again, they've made such a difference for patients. And
Mm-hmm.
again, that's a hidden part, Sue, that most patients wouldn't have any idea that it's happening. The other piece of it that I think is a huge win that I really feel good about is this idea of staff embracing the change and putting it into their daily work. If we can get people to believe that improvement can be done daily, then we really can understand how the organization can leapfrog forward with great
Mm-hmm.
strides. But it comes down to daily work, the actual
Yeah.
charting of daily things up on a board that lets us know, are we doing better than we were yesterday? And not all goals are available to do that with. Some of them are much longer term. Some of them we have to wait for data. There's the
Yep.
lagging data in healthcare that makes it incredibly difficult to try to figure
Mm-hmm.
out. But again, I would say the glory moments are when staff figure out a way to interpret before the official data comes back. They already
Mm-hmm.
know whether they're going to be on the success train or not because
Mm-hmm.
of the individual work that they're doing on a daily basis. That is so interesting. I feel a bit badly about the fact that so many of the indicators in healthcare are lagging indicators
Mm-hmm.
because
Yeah.
for me, when I talk about goal setting, I talk about it's like driving a car. You're not going to spend 90% of your time looking in the rearview mirror and 10% of the time looking at the road ahead of you. You've got to spend
Mm-hmm.
90% of your time on the road ahead, 10% in the rearview mirror. But with lagging indicators, you've got to check the rearview mirror, you know,
Way too often.
yeah, that's right. That's right. I think if you can find a practical way, even if it isn't a perfect system, to get it
Yeah.
into the daily work, it gives staff a real sense of making a difference, which is what this is all
Yeah.
about. And that's the
And
goal.
they're probably the ones that are best suited to figure that piece out because they're closest to it, and they can figure out kind of what is an alternative way that's more of a lead measure versus a lag one that's going to help
Oh,
us know that we're on the right track and we're doing the right things so that this does get better and that we get a sign. Because I always say data gives us really two things. It helps us know what to work on and to
mhm.
know if what we're working on is working.
Yeah,
And so to your point, getting more data savvy at all levels, even right to the front line, is an important aspect of what we do.
right. It's or we look at data that 90 days old or 180 days old and say, oh, that's what we shoulda, could have been doing.
Mm,
It's an interesting piece, though. If you can involve frontline staff, even in subjective measures, like interviewing patients before they leave,
yeah.
you're not going to get empirical data, or
No.
the empirical data isn't going to be exactly perfect. But
Yeah.
that is a sense of real information that, first of all, connects you to your patient, but
Yeah.
second of all, gets direct information to frontline staff or frontline leaders that will directly affect our pillar of service
Hmm.
when we look at
Hmm.
patient satisfaction information. There's a
Yeah.
direct connection there that if staff can understand that, it gives a great way for them to say, oh, I know how I'm involved in that.
Yeah, it's a form of feedback. I mean, it's qualitative feedback, it's qualitative data, it's maybe we could call it subjective opinion, but it really is helpful feedback and it's real time. I mean, that's
Right.
really helpful when it's real time.
Yeah, it's the road in front of you, not the road behind you, which I think is incredibly important.
Exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
right there. I'm going to talk about a word that sometimes comes up when it talks about goal cycles is the word accountability. So we're accountable to set a goal. And actually, in our company, 12 years ago, when we started our company, we actually use that word in our framework is, set a goal, set strategies, and then be accountable to those strategies. And we actually were given feedback to say, change that word because it has such a negative connotation. So we actually changed it to ownership. What would you say about this idea about organizations that have a systematic way of setting goals, working to achieve goals, and this idea about accountability systems, or this sense of when we say we're going to do something, we're actually going to try really hard to do it. Even if we don't get it, we're going to be accountable to it. How do you feel like since 2017 to current in your organization that what did accountability have to do with it, or what happened to accountability? And were there systems that changed that made you more accountable?
First of all, let's talk about those two words because I'm all about words. I love words.
I love
So
words too, as much as
my
I love numbers.
yeah, yeah. So my feeling about it is that accountability is put on to people and
Mm,
ownership is intrinsic.
mm,
If you use those sort of rough definitions, I would say that for many leaders and many organizations, you need to start out with accountability because it's not clear what the expectations are. The
mhm.
process isn't clear. We're still in the early stages of PDSA. I remember early discussions in 2017 where leaders would set a mediocre level and say, yeah, I'll get there in 5 years. And the response has to be an accountability response of, nope, that's not acceptable. We need
Mhm.
you to get there, hopefully within 3 years. And I firmly believe that you can do that.
Yeah.
So that is the accountability piece that I think holding people accountable is common
Mm,
phrase that's being used. But I think as leaders get better, as organizations get better, as we refine the work and the cycle becomes something that is very systematic, then you see people turn it to ownership. I'll
mm.
give you a real practical example. A few years ago, I would send out a notice to leaders to say, okay, time for you to report on your departmental goals. Please get it in by the 15th of the month. You know those notes, right?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, right.
I'm
And
picturing it.
at that point in time, I would say maybe 20% of those leaders would send information in the first week, and another 40 of them, 40% would send it in by the next week. And then there would be here's the second notice, here's the third notice, get me your information, right? But in the last year or year and a half, I'm getting information before I send out the note.
Yes.
So it's turning from accountability to ownership, first of all. And second of all, they don't have to look for the information because they're already using it. It's already part of their work. It's already part
Mhm.
of their cycle of saying, oh, so this is my information about my departmental goals. Here's how we're doing. I need to tell my senior lead. I need to tell my staff. I need to send information so that we know where the organization is going. So all of a
Mhm.
sudden, it has turned from accountability. How are you doing? Get your note in to ownership. Look at how well we're doing. I'm so excited about the work. So
I can't wait to tell you.
that's right. That's right. So I think there may be two words, two sides of the same coin, but I think they have
Mhm.
a very different feel in a culture. It is much more about pride in what I do rather than you should be proud of what you do. Um,
Yes.
Yeah, it's been a really interesting transformation, and you can almost see that happen at a point in time with the leader who's understanding that this goal cycle piece is very much part of culture. So then all of a sudden, it isn't extra work; it's real work.
It is real work. It's just a way to organize. So, it creates this cadence of activities that just keep us marching better and better and better in measurable ways and in very aligned ways too. If there's organizations out there, because I get into a lot of organizations, I talk to a lot of organizations. We're specifically working in healthcare, as you know, and in particular with small organizations, but I know they have like a strategic planning cycle. I know that they have a budget cycle. And I always see this goal cycle as something that kind of connects the two, right? We say in our strategies, we're going to do this, in these pillars, and we budget resources to do that, but we don't set up this goal cycle that says, okay, here's the measurements that we're going to set that are the targets for improvement. Here's the action plans we're going to set. And it kind of is kind of that glue in between, I think, or that system in between. But if you were to make a little sales pitch for them of like, you should do this, I want to inspire you to do this, what would your pitch be? What would be your why in your pitch to them to actually do this?
I feel like the goal cycle and a very clear roadmap of being able to develop, implement, and evaluate that cycle really provides the stability of evaluating how you're moving the organization forward. You can look at budgets, you can look at strategic plans, but I think that if you look at pillars of success and are involving everyone in the organization with those pillars of how we know we're moving the organization forward, they not only feel a part of it, but they feel very safe in knowing where the organization is going for the future. It's stability and it's being comfortable with knowing that the organization is going to be successful.
That is well stated as rationale for making this happen in an organization.
I would say one of the other pieces that I think has been really successful in Tamarack Health's success is this approach of looking at strategic planning in a very nimble sort of way to be able to differentiate us from our competitors and also to be able to grab hold of an opportunity when it happens. That can only happen if you are strong and secure in your pillars of success and in your goal cycle.
Yeah. Well, we're getting to the end of our time together. Doesn't it go by fast when you set up time to have a conversation? I know. Can you believe it? But I do have a final question I love to ask our guests, which is there anything that, as you were thinking about our time together where you said, I've got this message or I've got this story or I've got this tactic or I got this tip that I want to make sure is included in this episode? Was there anything like that, Kevin, that I don't want to leave you without having said what you might have wanted to say?
I don't know if this fits into that, but a piece that I think is incredibly important to understand from my perspective as a strategist is this idea that everything is connected. It's not the budget cycle, the goal cycle, the strategy cycle. It's all part of it. It's not the organization pillar of success and the department goals and the individual goals. It's all part of it. It's not clinical and non-clinical people. It's all of us. It is so easy for us to keep that idea of siloing like happens in healthcare in so many ways. And I think the more that we can embrace the idea that we're all in it together, I think the more successful that we will be. It's one of the reasons why I think this idea, one great experience, one great team, has been so effective for us in the response from frontline staff who can know and understand that and that it fits into their real work. It's all of us. It's not this department or this shift or this site within an organization. It's all of us. It takes everybody to be able to move an organization forward. It's hard work, but it's easier if everyone's pulling together.
It is. That's such a good point. And, it made me think back to an earlier part of this conversation, Kevin, when you talked about how we move from accountability kind of in the beginning. That's kind of how this kind of starts, is it feels like more like an accountability move. And then it moves into an ownership move as you go through the cycles and people take on a whole new perception of this and feeling about it. But I think that could also be here too, as you start out with your goal cycle, and it may feel very compartmentalized, or even though you're trying to align people to the pillars of success and you're trying to align individual departments to the organizational goals and those kind of things, it can feel like our department's doing this. But I noticed that as goal cycles continue on and mature in organizations, is you kind of tap out your unique opportunities in your individual department that you can set a goal for and fully achieve without involvement of other departments, right? And it's pretty soon you have to look outside your own department and say, if the ER is going to fix this, it's going to take radiology and lab and admitting and and we have to all do it together. And so it brings you together outside of your individual, because you tap that individual silo and its ability to set and achieve goals. You tap that out pretty early on when you set this up, is my opinion. So soon you're all in it together.
Well, and Sue, if that's not culture, what is?
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. Well, this has certainly been delightful. I knew it would be, and I knew we would have fun around this topic of setting and achieving goals and its impact on culture. And I appreciate you so much for being willing to come and share your wisdom on this topic. It's such important work. And we have appreciated working with your organization and you in particular over the years. So good to see you in this format today. Thanks, Kevin.
Good to see you too. Thanks for your time. It was great.
Thanks for tuning in to Culture Change RX. If you found value in today's episode and you are a believer in fostering change in healthcare, join us in making a difference. Follow, rate, and review our podcast on your favorite platform. Share it with colleagues and your network. Together, we can make a lasting impact. Until next week, keep inspiring positive change.